Welcome to Dear Future, the podcast exploring AI and its many fabulous, interesting, unique, all over the place use cases. Each episode features someone using AI in an interesting or innovative way. We have lots of questions, and we'll be diving in with our guests every week.
This idea that everything's been done before can be challenged.
I've been dreaming of a computer like this my whole life.
It really made me think more about how our brains work.
It's not coming from anywhere else. It's only coming from us.
Dear Future.
Welcome to another episode of Dear Future. I'm your host, Suki Mansour. In today's episode, we have the pleasure of diving into the technological revolution of NeRFs with our guest, Michael Rubloff. As the managing editor of Neural Radiance Fields.io, Michael is at the forefront of the groundbreaking evolution of modern visual experiences through his contributions to Neural Radiance Fields, or NeRFs. With notable collaborations alongside industry titans like NVIDIA AI and a powerful presentation and event held at SIGGRAPH 2023, Michael is leading the charge in bringing photorealistic 360-degree visuals to diverse industries, from technology to marketing and beyond. But his expertise does not stop there. As a foundational member of Mate Fertility, Michael uses his keen business acumen to propel the company to an impressive multi-million-dollar valuation. Educated at the prestigious SI Newhouse School of Public Communications, Michael's background is a really unique blend of technological innovation and strategic vision, making him a captivating voice in today's digital age. Welcome, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us. I have a lot of questions, but first I wanted to ask, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the show today. I've been looking forward to this since we actually spoke a couple months ago, just prior to SIGGRAPH. So super excited to be here. Thank you.
I want to start with asking a little bit about your journey into this intersection of art and AI. So many people are curious about how to get involved, how to get started. And I think it's really important for us at least to know how you got here and how you made your way into this really interesting crossroads.
For me, it pretty much started around COVID, where my COVID hobby became very quickly scanning things. And at the time, I was using LiDAR because I found it really fascinating how you could get these really precise representations of whatever it was that you were showing. And for me, I really wanted to use it to freeze moments in time. So my friends and family and the people that were in my COVID pod became very used to getting scanned wherever we went. And so I would do that, but the issue was I could never get clean faces. It would always look not totally right. And in about February of 2022, I saw a tweet where basically someone had just published a NeRF that they had done with Instant NGP. And I very, very quickly was just like, I'm no longer interested in LiDAR. I want to go full into NeRFs and radiance fields. And at the time, it was a bit more intensive to put together Instant NeRF. And so you had to install all the dependencies. And for me, it actually took me about 6 hours to get it installed at first on the computer. And at the time, I actually didn't have a computer. So I was able to convince one of my friends, who I ended up forming the Frank Lucent artist project with, Sean Kim. I was able to convince him to lend me his computer, which actually turned into a 10-month loan. And I bought a 3080. And this was at the very peak, it seemed like, of graphics card prices. So I think I paid something like $1,500 for a 3080, which is just totally unthinkable. But it was an amazing investment. And, I'm really glad that it kind of sent me down that rabbit hole. And so from there, I took around 1,000 to 2,000 different NeRFs across last year going into this year. And throughout that time, different platforms such as Luma AI, NeRF Studio, and Valinga have all really emerged, as well as Polycam now supports Gaussian splatting. And there's another company called Xbata. And so it's really just never been easier now to get going with NeRFs.
First of all, it's incredible, the state of experimentation and the state of passion that just is required for you to get started. I also know people who, when I say things like Gaussian splatting and NeRFs, are really confused. It sounds like a messed up cake recipe or like some kind of Nerf battle or paintball. It's so hard to help non-technical people understand these really technical things. Yeah, I think so much of the job is translating. And as a filmmaker who's coming from a very non-technical background, speaking to you who's been immersed in this for so long, give me a little rundown of what NeRFs are to intelligent but very uninformed humans that might not have ever heard of this, but maybe seen examples. Explain it in very simple terms. Explain it like I'm 10.
So essentially, both NeRFs and Gaussian splatting, where they are similar, is that they are both radiance fields, which is kind of the overarching technology. When you take a look at what a NeRF is, you're able to feed it individual two-dimensional images into their methods. And from what it's able to do is generate a composited three-dimensional photorealistic scene. And so for NeRFs, it's definitely a very intimidating word, especially when you make it the full word of neural radiance field. But when you actually break it down, it actually isn't as confusing and intimidating as it sounds. The neural part of it is it's fed through a neural network. The most confusing part in my mind is the radiance part. And essentially what that means is depending on your viewing angle, the individual pixel, depending on that angle, will have a different radiance value. So what will it actually look like depending on what you're looking at? So that's the neural radiance part. And then the field is just how it's actually being displayed. So when you're looking at it, it's a collection of all of those together that composites into a neural radiance field. You can kind of take a look at it as well as being like almost like a three-dimensional photograph that you have complete and total autonomy over. Whereas with photography, you're really given the composition that the photographer has taken. With radiance fields, you're able to actually create the composition for yourself, or each individual user is able to set what means the most to them in terms of taking a look at a scene or moment in time.
Okay, so describe this to me for your artistic process. Tell me, what is the workflow of creating a neural radiance field?
For me, it's been a ton of trial and error, but as it turns out, it's actually very, very simple to create a NeRF. First off, any single camera is able to take a NeRF or a radiance field. Doesn't need to have a proprietary camera system. You don't need to have LiDAR. You could use a film camera if you actually wanted to, as long as you give it the correct information. Any camera is able to create a NeRF. If you go out, say, with an iPhone or whatever device that you have, the biggest thing is introducing something called parallax into your actual scene. What it basically means is that you need to really be walking in an arc. So similar to like photography, if you use like a prime lens, for instance, a fixed focal length lens, if you need to zoom, you zoom with your feet. You go and you walk around to get that actual shot that you need. And same thing is true for radiance fields, where instead of zooming in for the specific shot, you want to get the coverage that you need. So you need to physically walk around either the scene or product or object that you are trying to capture. And the big thing is creating like an arc, that sense of parallax around it, and giving the actual underlying methods enough information to generate a photorealistic output. The way to do that is actually walking around in a circle or a spiral or star method are some of the current ways that people are doing it now. It's actually a lot easier to get started than you would imagine something called neural radiance fields would imply.
Okay, and why would I use a neural radiance field? Like, in what context would using a method in which I walk around an object several times to craft this 360-degree field, where would that serve me? Help me understand why I would want this in my life and who would want this.
Anytime that you currently take a photo or a video right now is a current use case for radiance field-based technologies. What I mean by that is if you have that flat two-dimensional image, you're limited by the composition in which the photographer has set for you. But with radiance fields, you're able to actually go in and explore the totality of either a moment. And now we're looking into potentially, dynamic or moving-based NeRFs and radiance fields as well. And so you take a look at industries such as entertainment, which are really starting to utilize NeRFs. Say you're a student filmmaker and you really want to film in the downtown strip of Las Vegas. But say you're based in New York and you have a student crew of like 5 or 6 people. You can't get to Las Vegas, let alone pay the permitting fees. What you could do with a NeRF essentially is you're able to capture, say, the downtown strip or any place in the world, and you can actually then put that into a virtual production environment. So you can actually be empowering tons of new stories that have never really either been told before, or you're also allowing students or people who don't have the actual resources to film in locations that they wouldn't otherwise. And at the same time, too, I think that you're really allowing businesses to monetize their actual presence in the face of production. And you're allowing people to create different lines of revenue for their businesses. You can also take a look at, say, museums, where I think it's something like 2 to 4% of all exhibitions are actually shown on a museum floor due to a myriad of reasons, security, the actual floor space itself, light exposure. There's quite a lot of reasons, but For me, being able to look at a photorealistic output of an entire space, I think that it really represents a massive opportunity for both museums and cultural heritage organizations to actually allow people to see artwork that they wouldn't get to see otherwise and actually interact and be educated and be inspired ultimately by the work contained there. And so when I say that it can apply to any industry, I really think that there's a ton. You could take a look at it from the retail side, you can take it from e-commerce, all the way up to heavy industry. I think that there's quite a lot of different applications for the technology. It really is dependent on what your individual use case is and how you would like to best showcase something in photorealistic 360.
All right, so we've got retail, we've got education, we've got cultural heritage, and we have storytelling, we've got media production. There's all of these worlds in which this technology is being, for the first time, maybe introduced as a potential use case. I was at this really wonderful AI symposium at UTA where I was on a panel talking about the future of work. And on the creatives panel, one of the speakers was a writer named Simon Rich. I loved something that he shared, many things that he shared, but one of the things that really struck me was his insights into the implementation of a new technology in a currently existing ecosystem generally starts off as the new technology trying to replicate the current technology that exists. So for example, when radio came along, it was replicating and trying to showcase itself as a newer, better version of newspapers. And so it sort of sounded like someone reading a column or reading a story. And then later when TV was introduced, it was sort of marketed as the new form of radio, like a visual radio style before it became its own art form and visual style and sort of leaned into new applications, new genres. Now with this, you're having this photorealistic 360-degree view that in many cases, some hardware exists for. We've got AR and VR, this hardware that hasn't super taken off yet, but is still kind of in its infancy. As someone who has been very much at the forefront of experimenting with, developing your own practice and relationship with making NeRFs, what are the applications that you are seeing in the next 5 to 10 years that might not have anything to do with the use cases that currently exist, the problems that currently exist, but maybe are innovations and creative applications that might not have use cases now, but in the future you could see yourself being really excited by? What could those new ways of thinking about NeRF development look like?
There's so many. It's almost, in my mind, nearly infinite in terms of how people adopt and grow their own individual use cases for it. Some of the ones that I'm really interested in is Google has been actually pretty public about their stance on NeRFs and what its role will be going forwards with Google Maps in terms of immersive view, as well as allowing restaurants and bars and coffee shops to have NeRFs be taken of it. This way, if you're like, oh, I have an important dinner coming up, but I really want to have like a special table, or I really want like a certain view, or I really want to understand this, but I don't know. Essentially allowing consumers to go into these digital representations in a photorealistic capacity to go and actually figure out, is this something that I want? Is this something that would meet my expectations? How can I have the best experience possible? And so I think that on that front, that's a huge application and one that Google has been, surprisingly public on. But on the other side of it, I think that there's a tremendous amount of manufacturing and AEC applications as well in terms of streamlining, say, like factories, making sure that you're doing like asynchronous maintenance of, say, like a nuclear reactor through a NeRF-based application that probably I won't have any interaction with. But for a lot of people, it would really represent a lot of cost savings and hopefully allow for more safety to be met in some of these larger industries as well. In 5 to 10 years, I think that it's going to be pretty present in terms of where we are interacting with it. I look at the history of photography, for instance, and how that emerged from daguerreotypes into film, into digital, to where we are now. I think that we are in the foundational stages of a entirely new content medium that's emerging that is photorealistic, accessible, three-dimensional content. I think it's going to be almost difficult to gauge where it will be in the next couple of years, because every time I've set an expectation of, oh, this will be nice to have in terms of a feature, I've either found out that someone's already done it or it's happened much faster than I would have ever expected it to. I think that's something that we might see repeatedly over the next few years.
It's incredibly exciting. There's this book that I read I loved so much called Technopoly. Neil Postman is talking about how the introduction of every new technology is ecosystemically driven, in that it will change everything about an ecosystem, that once it is introduced, everything around it really changes and shifts. He really drives home the point that there's no way for a technology to only affect a few things. It actually alters the entire perceptual field of the mentality, the way of thinking, the way of discussing, the way of operating, and decimates the worldview that existed before. And so I am keenly aware, even as a technologically excitable person, there's things that we lose in the process, and we have to be aware of what are the things that we're losing, so we're at least knowledgeable of the choice we are making. And so to you, I'm asking, what are the sacrifices that you can recognize you are making in your own life? Maybe not even the big picture dangers, but also the personal sacrifices that you might be making, or the way your worldview is changing to adapt to this new technological way of looking and operating in the world.
I look at it more as a larger positive in terms of like the way that my life has been shifting. I'll give you a couple examples. One is I've captured a lot of nerfs of my parents and family now, with the intention of going into VR in infinite generations forward to be able to have a photorealistic view of my family. And so I think that it's kind of like resetting our expectations of what interactivity means and what our lives are like at any given point in history. For me, I think it really represents a moment in time where, similar to the introduction of photography, we're actually going to be fundamentally changing the way in which we interact with either memories, moments in time in our life, or I think that we're going to have higher standards when it comes to, say, product photography or being able to go and shoot places. I think that it really just makes a more compelling experience during our lifetime, which I'm really, really excited about, because I don't think we've had a paradigm shift like this in a very long time. It's exciting for me to kind of see the beginning of it starting to happen.
But also, like, what are the downsides? Does that mean that we're just going to be on our phones more? Does it mean that we are going to be spending more time in front of screens? What does that look like?
As the technology continues to grow and it gets more and more powerful and the fidelity gets better, there are going to be some, items that we just need to think through in terms of responsible capture and such. But given the precedents and the experience that we've had over the last, 100 years to watch a similar industry emerge, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to solve any danger issues as they emerge.
It's a very exciting and optimistic viewpoint, which I do like. I'm also an optimist, but it's also really interesting that even as you're in it, for you, there's less of a concern for anything we need to be mindful of now, and sort of like technology will solve it, And I think that's a very specific kind of worldview, which is shared by a lot of people that are using these tools right now. And with that, are there any ethical considerations that you think about when you're using these tools? Or is there a sort of moral compass around which you use these tools in a specific way? What are you thinking about when you are going out and catching nerfs? Are there things that you're like, ooh, this is my boundary of where I'm going to shoot or not shoot, or what consent? The idea of like getting permits, or if you can shoot a nerf of a location on your phone, what's stopping anyone from coming into your location maybe when you're not ready and shooting more, whatever. What are your thoughts around the ethics and uses of these nerfs?
On the form of licensing and actual digital ownership of a location. Take that example of, say you're like a local coffee shop, and for whatever reason, people love to film in your location, but they're just either coming in or they're capturing it, or somehow they've obtained a file and they're just monetizing it. I think it's critical for these places to be able to actually monetize on their digital likeness and be able to see value from that. As of right now, that side of the industry hasn't emerged in terms of what people are creating with it right now. But I think it is going to be critical that, similar to how the music industry has, performing rights organizations, I think that there's probably going to need to be somewhat of an equivalent for digital rights. On the other side, in terms of morality and ethics, when you take a look at cultural heritage, for instance, Radiance Fields model exactly what they see. And so I go back to the history of photography, for instance, when we were taking photos of the Great Depression or the Vietnam War, where you're actually exposing a side of life that people, the vast majority of, don't experience and don't see. And for a lot of people, it can be, disturbing or hard to see. But at the same time, too, I think that if you're coming at it from an educational perspective and making people aware, I think it actually will be really beneficial to help bring an increased awareness to these issues that are happening around the world right now, because they are able to be represented in a complete photorealistic manner. I think that will also contribute to a responsible capture in terms of showcasing that story and not necessarily trying to take advantage of people who are in those, scenarios, but being able to actually help tell their story so that people can learn from it and support what they're going through.
It actually makes me think a lot about the ways in which deepfakes are also going to become a part of how we start to engage with media, is questioning what is real, what is actually manipulated, especially with the rise of generative AI. In many ways, even though neural radiance fields are influenced by generative AI and that they sort of fill in the gaps in between the photogrammetry capture, if that's even the right way to say it, AI is helping to create a full photorealistic, seamlessly integrated image of a moment. If in some ways that is going to be a balancing force with this deepfake generative AI world where folks are saying that's not real, that's AI. And you get to say, well, actually, this is a capture of a real moment. And then from a journalistic and documentary perspective, if the thing that is going to be really important is actually using AI on the other side to capture very photorealistic moments where you can say, actually, this is not just an image, as 2D images and even 2D videos start to be questioned, if 360-degree views are actually going to be a space in which people can feel a little bit more trust in the environment. And I'm curious if that's something that you have talked with other filmmakers about or other storytellers about in their use cases. It actually sort of combats misinformation in more ways than other tools.
The way that these methods are being trained on is original 2D images. And so once they've been created, those original images don't go anywhere. And so if there is ever like a question, you have an actual view of that entire moment. I think that there's always going to be that ability to go back and look at the actual source of what was inputted. And that's one of the benefits too, is that I don't think that this replaces photography in any way. Because one, you can create a composition and slice it out, and then you have a 2D representation of it. But you also then still have all the existing sources where if you wanted to view it from just the 2D image, and that's exactly what you're looking for, then you still have access to that.
This is great. One of the things I want to sort of lean into a little bit is what you're doing with Neural Radiance Fields. Tell me about this website that you're building. Tell me about the ways in which you yourself as an individual are finding ways to represent yourself as a creative and also a director and a business owner, an entrepreneur in this world, because I know so many creatives are very scared of how this is going to replace them, affect them, modify the ways in which they're able to get work. And you clearly have found a way to make a niche in this world and be a front runner and a voice in this space. And I want to know, what is it that you're doing? What are you excited about? And what is it that you want to share maybe other aspiring creatives who are trying to find their little slice of the pie in this space?
I'm very excited about so much of this. I'll give you the background of the website as well and kind of like what spurred its creation. Throughout the course of the back half, really, of last year, I was seeing all these amazing creative outputs, all these papers that were coming out that researchers were doing. And I kept saying, I was like, wow, this is incredible. I can't believe that, we're at a point where this is no longer science fiction. This is something that people can do. It's something that I can do without having a technical background. What would happen was I felt like, all right, well, I don't really have like a voice to go out and broadcast that. And so what I decided to do was I'm going to go out and I'm going to send all this material to every publication that I can think of. Because while I don't have like that platform, there's all these people who do have these amazing platforms. But what ended up happening was I didn't hear back from a single one. Nobody, I got ghosted by 100% of them. And it got to the point where I was like, if they're not going to cover it, then I can start covering it up until they start covering it, because hopefully if they see, oh, look, someone else is covering this, perhaps then we should as well. And so that was what made me start the website at first. And from there, as I started to write more and more, I started to realize the actual breadth of research that's being done, combined with the creative use cases, such as our mutual friend, Jake Olson, who has been really incredible. He has a short film called Given Again that's 100% created with Nerfs, as well as doing some music videos for both R.L. Grime and Zayn Malik, formerly of One Direction. And at the same time, all these people that are also creating amazing things with Nerfs and pushing creative use cases and applications forwards. And that actually was the impetus we put together a art exhibition that took place at SIGGRAPH in LA this past August. We went out and we got about 15 to 20 Nerf creators who are all specializing in different, things. I really am fascinated by human Nerfs and representing like human moments in time. But some people are really interested in like botany, for instance, and documenting like, here's a whole range of like mushrooms, for instance. This is like the fun facts about them. This is how you can interact with them. And some people are interested in locations, architecture. And so what we were trying to do is showcase all of the creative work that people were doing in the space and putting them into a really accessible location so that people can kind of interact with it and see that it's not as difficult as you might imagine. I look at it in a way where I think that at the beginning of photography, it must have been pretty difficult to comprehend. You click a shutter and then you can get a representation of the world in front of you. We have a lot of work to kind of close that feedback loop from the research being done to actually people using it in the real world and getting that feedback back to the researchers so they can build on top of it. And so for me, the website was a way that I could try and speed that up a bit. So bring awareness to all the amazing research that's being done across teams at like, NVIDIA and Meta Reality Labs and Google, for instance, and some of the other universities across the country and the world, really. It seemed like it's been a pretty international adoption of the technology and the amount of research. I started the website and I went full time in March of this year. It's been pretty exciting. So I try to write at least one article a day. And so I think I'm just around a little bit over 200 articles on the website now. The goal is just bring as much awareness to people who are creating in the space and try and introduce people who are creating to one another. And that can be people who are creating new methods on the engineering side to creators who like Jake, for instance, or it could be just creator to creator. It's really about, creating a community of people that can ask questions to one another, because similar to photography, there are best practices, but nobody really knows yet what they are. For me, I look at that as an exciting challenge for people to go out and find for themselves and for the collective world of what are the laws of Nerfs? What are they going to be? Similar to photography, how we, now understand exposure triangle very intimately. I'm excited to hopefully foster those connections for people.
It's amazing to be a world builder and sort of resource and bridge between all of these people that are involved, the tool makers, the tool users. And I'm curious, how are you able to monetize it? Is it like advertising? Like, what's the model that you're using to be able to focus and pay attention to this as much as you are?
I have now partnered with some corporations that have been very interested in utilizing Nerfs in their product workflow. So that's primarily how I'm making money. As of right now, the website is generating $0. I would like it to be as accessible as possible for people so that they can go out and create their own applications for it. So right now, the totality of my salary is coming out of consulting for various corporations, but some of which have come from people just reading the website and reaching out to understand, like, is this something that you can take a Nerf of? Can I Nerf this couch to put on like my interior design website? And I was like, yes, of course you can. For them, it was like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that I can do that. And then how do I actually get started? Because when I first got started in photography, for instance, I didn't take my camera outside for the first month or two until I felt like I actually was confident enough how to actually take a well-exposed photo. And so for me, I want to be able to provide that resource for people to kind of see something that looks intimidating and become more accustomed and more comfortable with actually going out and capturing it for themselves. So I look at it more as just like a jumping off point. I want it to be like a source of imagination for people to kind of build on top of.
I think it's so amazing what you're telling me, because you are defining an archetype of a kind of creator that is a combination creator, practitioner, technician, and educator. And that in many ways, your passion is not only in learning how to utilize these tools more effectively, more creatively, but also teaching other people how to do it and monetizing your ability to create a workflow and to generate options for a company that has no idea what they're doing and sort of teach them in your own way how to solve a problem using this particular technology. I'd love to know how you stumbled upon that and what your process is around creating workflows for these larger companies, because I think that your process, this particular process of selling your expertise as a workflow generator around a particular tool, is going to become more of a business model that others follow, regardless of the generative tool. And I'd love to know how you do that.
It definitely started out a bit unintentional, where my first use case that I really wanted to explore was an evolution of photography and figuring out like, how do I actually just like showcase moments in time? And so that's where most of the trial and error came from, was just the upfront work of how do I get something that doesn't look terrible? At the time, there were very few people online posting, like 10 or so. And now like the barrier to adoption is so much lower, thanks to platforms like Luma, for instance, where it's just on your iPhone or even like Polycam as well now using Gaussian splatting. On the corporation side, as I started to create more and more, the more I realized potential applications of this technology are so far reaching that it almost became, how do I decide what industry would be best suited to adopt this technology first? What I've seen happen over the last year and a half or so is the entertainment industry went first in terms of like adapting it for virtual production use cases. But going forwards, I've started to speak to more companies across different industries and different verticals, and it really is understanding what their specific workflow and what their actual like product offering is to consumers. One use case that I'm really excited about is e-commerce. A lot of times I've purchased something where the stock photos that were online weren't necessarily representative of, say, the quality of the actual item itself, or I didn't really feel like I could understand what it was I was purchasing. But now, using Radiance Field-based technologies, you're actually able to get a really photorealistic understanding of the object. You can see like the actual texture. You can see like, oh, does the product have dried glue along the back of it that you wouldn't normally get to see until you actually have it in front of you, and being able to actually make an informed decision as a consumer about what it is that I want to purchase. And so once you've identified that, it's about going back to those companies and finding out, how do you solve that pain point for a consumer? And then, I think it's very similar to consulting and making a better experience and product then for a consumer. And that can also then be applied back to their sourcing too. So say if you're a toy company and you're no longer getting these flat image mock-ups, but you're getting these photorealistic views of it off of the factory floor, and you can iterate much faster and at much like earlier stage as well. So I think it also would be saving them a ton on the upfront cost and making it significantly, less risky without necessarily having someone fly all the way just to observe something like that. So I really believe that there are a myriad of companies and industries that can really leverage the technology. I think that it's going to be significantly more compelling if people are able to create their own meanings and own like imaginations about, oh, it'd be amazing if I could do this, and our consumers would really love it if they could do X. For me, I view this as an initial gateway to start that conversation.
What is your advice to these creatives that you're creating this website for, and even companies that would like to get started with NERFs and don't really know how? What would be your advice to folks that want to create NERFs and folks who want to use them in their particular product offering and exploring the potentiality for how NERFs can play into their marketing, their sales, user experience with customers? Ending on a note of having done this work with multiple kinds of people, both from the student side as an educator and also from the company side as a consultant and as an artist, creating these NERFs for yourself because you are curious and you want to play, and making your own workflows through that passion and curiosity. What would your advice be to those folks who might not have caught the bug yet, who you are trying to onboard into this world of creativity and technological innovation?
To answer the first part of that, with people who want to go and get started, that's the most difficult thing. That first minute of being like, all right, here's the moment where I'm actually going to go and take this or go and try something. My advice is just try it. Just walk outside. It probably will be terrible the first time you go and create something, but I think it's really the best way to learn. There's really no reason to not just go out and see what happens and try and experiment. Think through what would be the most insane thing that would not be possible today, and try and create it through this representation. Also find out what individually you'd want to see. If that's capturing people, if that's documenting an object. Say if you have a collection of statues or figurines, you can go and actually document those and then bring them into Unreal Engine. You just try it. You see what interests you. On the other side of corporations, and I think it really starts with the end user and who their consumer is, and what are the services that you always wish that you could have provided through nerfs and radiance fields as a whole, a lot of it has become possible. If you take a look at, say, like the fashion industry, I think is a huge industry that's going to really be able to leverage this well, because you can actually showcase to people what it's like to wear your clothing from every angle. You can see like, oh, this is actually something that I can envision myself wearing. So I would say, really evaluating what your business needs are. And then same thing is just starting out again and trying it and seeing how does this work? How does this function? How can I get this in the hands of my end users to make a better experience overall for them?
I love that. Is there anything that you wanted to speak about that I didn't have the foresight to consider asking you?
If there's anyone who has been considering creating with nerfs or has projects, they can always feel free to reach out to me directly. I'll respond to them and I'll help them, the best that I can. And, if they have a project, I want to be able to showcase it to the world. And that's one of the big intentions of the website. My website is neuralradiancefields.io. It will be moving over to radiancefields.com. The next best place to reach out to me would be through LinkedIn. Just add me on LinkedIn at Michael Rubloff and we can talk.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you being here. And we can't wait for people to get to know you and your website.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on today.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. This is a podcast where we chat with folks who are building tools, using tools, and exploring the ways in which AI can help augment their creativity and their business. We want to hear from you, so if you have any questions or suggestions, even invitations about tools that we should feature, creators that we should talk to, or even folks asking questions about ethics and use cases that really are important for us to acknowledge at this time, we would love to hear it. Please reach out to us and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much. We recorded this podcast with our partners at Echo Bend Pictures. We are so happy to be partnering with them for this season of Dear Future. Thank you for having us.
Dear Future.